Monday and Tuesday of this week, I was in Minden and Doyline in Webster Parish in North Louisiana. There is an old military base, and proposed on that base is to open burn in trays 16 million pounds of what's called M6, an explosive. And guess what? The citizens do not want it to be open burn because they don't want all those emissions coming into their community. And that is the community of Doyline, right next to the military base, and Minden close by. So tonight, we're here in Alexandria to talk to you about what's going on specifically at the wood treating facilities in your community. Last weekend, I was in Houston speaking at the Environmental Protection Agency Toxic Waste Inventory Conference, a 2-day conference. And you were there with me. I presented the data on your community concerning dioxins in your blood and dioxins in your attic dust. So you had a voice and a face at that conference, and the attendees at the conference were blown away by what data we now have on your community and what is going on here in your community. So, Ms. Agnes is looking at getting the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry to do a health assessment to determine just how unhealthy your community is. Some of you in the community have already performed similar health surveys on a few of the people. But to get ready for our national health assessment, we need a lot more data. We have a lot of data, but we have a lot of gaps in that data. We need DEQ here in the front row. We need EPA, Charlotte in the back, to perform additional sampling. Because when EPA and DEQ perform the sampling, sometimes they split the samples in two and give one sample to either the industry or the city or our local government, and then they analyze the other one. And in most cases, the cities come back non-detect, nothing there, where the DEQ and the EPA data has a whole host of chemicals there, and frequently those chemicals exceed the acceptable standards. So we need those two agencies to do additional sampling to fill that data gap before we do the health survey. So this is the handout we're going to be working from. Does everyone have one of these? There should be some more outside if not. So we're talking about the wood treating facilities. They use two types of chemicals. They use creosote, like the telephone poles. And remember when you were little, your mom told you not to go touch that pole because it would burn your hands. And then when you came home and you were tucking your hand behind your back, she knew you had touched it and it had burned your hand. It has a lot of toxic chemicals in it. The second chemical, the second type of chemical is what's called pentachlorophenol. And I know that's a big name. But the pentachlorophenol has dioxin in it as part of the manufacturing process. So when they make pentachlorophenol, it has dioxin in it. And then that chemical is brought to the wood treating facilities and used to be under pressure, put in the wood, and then people become exposed to not only the wood products, but also the waste that flows into the air, into the water, into the groundwater, and into the soil. So let's look at those two big facilities here in Alexandria/Pineville. So Colfax Treating is now known as Stella Jones. And you have to remember, over the years, the name of the facility has changed. It started construction and operation in 1926. How many of you were born in 1926? It's been there a long, long time. And they pressurized the wood, and they used creosote and pentachlorophenol. So they used the two toxic chemicals. Remember, pentachlorophenol has dioxin in it. Creosote consists of what's called polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, or a lot of people just say PAHs, such as naphthalene and anthracene. And then pentachlorophenol contains the dioxin and furan. In 1970, that facility was known as the former Royal Morton, and it was operated as Jewelry Wood Treating Company. Then in December of '99, Railworks Wood Products purchased the facility, and the facility contains soil, sediment, and groundwater contamination of the facility itself and around the facility. It's contaminated the Chaplain Lake Canal, Hunters Park, and Bethel Street. So y'all all know where those streets and those parks are. So on-site, soil, sediment, water, and groundwater, and off-site, those same contaminants at Chaplain Lake Canal, Hunters Park, and Bethel Street. Then in 2001, they filed for bankruptcy. So Colfax Treaty, which is a subsidiary of Royal Morton, retained ownership and responsibility. So they are the responsible party for a portion of the site. And it's 11.87 acres, and it contains 2 closed hazardous waste management units, groundwater monitoring wells, and groundwater recovery wells. So it's pumping out contaminated groundwater as we sit here tonight. And then in 2010, the operating part of the plant was purchased by Stella Jones, and they currently operate it. So people now refer to it as Stella Jones. So let's look at what that facility, the Stella Jones facility, is releasing. They have an air permit, which means they are allowed under a DEQ air permit. EPA delegated the air program to DEQ, and DEQ had issued an air permit. So they can release into the air phenol, naphthalene, which is part of the creosote, biphenyls, creosote, PAHs, which is part of the creosote, and quinoline. The naphthalene is a major component of creosote, and it's allowed to be released in the largest quantities. 9 tons a year of creosote is allowed to be released into the air you breathe. 9 tons a year. So the toxic release inventory, which was a topic of the EPA conference over the weekend, this is what Stella Jones reports for 2013. 2014 data is not required to be reported to EPA until July of 2015. So this 2013 data is the most recent data that the industry has reported to EPA. Creosote. Creosote is a chemical you use to treat the wood. Over 12,000 pounds are released into the air a year. 27 pounds are released into Hanson Bayou, and 16 pounds are released into the wastewater treatment facility that's known as Hudson. So air, surface water, and then into the wastewater treatment where when you flush your toilet, your waste goes. And then if it's not treated appropriately by the wastewater treatment plant, it's discharged into a surface water body. Polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, 10 pounds into the air, over 1 pound into the bayou, and 0.8 of a pound into the wastewater treatment plant. The facility has a wastewater permit. Again, DEQ grants them the permit. EPA has delegated the program to DEQ at the state level, and that wastewater discharge permit allows them to discharge arsenic, copper, oil and grease, total organics into Hanson Bayou. These are all allowed to occur from the facility. So last time we talked a lot about people's complaints, odor complaints, specifically from the Stella Jones. How many of you have smelled bad odors from that facility? Raise your hand. How many of you have reported it? So here's the list. Complaints to both DEQ and EPA concerning odors and potential chemical emissions that are dangerous and are toxic. Strong creosote smell. Railroad ties releasing odors into residential areas. Railroad ties are stacked up right near the residential area. Strong chemical odors. Strong odors near Stella Jones reported 12/25/14. 12/25/14 was after we had our meeting in early December at the library. This is the lady who reported it. 12/25/14. The inspector from DEQ didn't come out until December the 30th. And when the inspector got there, he said he didn't smell any odor during the plant visit. So after the meeting, you can talk to Chris Ratcliffe and his associate about responding quickly to complaints, because if it smells today and a DEQ person comes out 3 days from now, it may not smell, and therefore they can't write up the company. Complaints of releasing into the air, water, and soil. As you saw on the page before, they're allowed to discharge into the air and into the water because they have permits to do that. Water drainage from the stacks of the treated timbers that flow off-site into the drainage and streams. Citizen surveys from the area south of the former Colfax facility in Alexandria describe illnesses and diagnose cancer. So those are the health surveys I was talking about. And then no numbers of cancer-related deaths. So that data is important to have on hand to give to the federal agency when they come in to do the health assessment. Now let's look at the one in Pineville. Anyone here from Pineville? In the back, there, thank you. So it's a wood preserving facility. It began operating in 1948. So how many of you were born in 1948 or were alive in 1948? It's not quite as old as the Stella Jones. And it was called former Colfax Treating from 69 to July 13, and now it's called KT Pineville starting in 2013. It's a wood preserving facility that treats poles, cross ties, and pilings, and it uses creosote, pentachlorophenol, and then we have a new one, at the bottom of page 3, chromated copper arsenic, CCA. If you go to like Home Depot and buy wood planks to do a patio, they are treated with the CCA. And there's been a lot of national focus on asking the Home Depot type facilities to phase it out. Because when you bring the baby out on the patio, the baby crawls around, puts their hands on the wood, and then puts it in its mouth. So you get that hand-to-mouth contamination. So we're trying to protect the health and not have them be exposed to the CCA. So on page 4, we look at the contaminants at the Pineville facility. Same ones, the benzoate, pyrene, anthracene, those are the PAHs. And then the site has a closed RCRA or hazardous waste impoundment, has groundwater recovery system, so that means it's still pumping contamination out of the groundwater. It has a treated system that was 27 biopiles, and then after it was treated and met the cleanup level, then it was covered over with liner and then a whole bunch of soil, like 12 inches. So let's look at what their air permit, DEQ, delegated from EPA, their air permit can discharge up to more than 72 tons a year. So that's a lot more than the Stella Jones facility. You look back on that page, Stella Jones doesn't have nearly as much as 72 tons a year. And those are formaldehyde, methanol, naphthalene, pentachlorophenol, and phenol. So let's look at the toxic release inventory. That was the conference this weekend. And reported into the air, into the water, and into their publicly owned water treatments, wastewater treatment, the sewer system. So the next page goes on and on. Creosote, over 12,000 pounds a year into the air, 77 pounds into the water of Puffman Creek, 2 pounds into the wastewater treatment facility. The phenol, remember that has the dioxin in it. A pound a year into the air, 9 pounds into the water, and almost 3 pounds into the wastewater. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And then you start arsenic, chromium, copper. Those are the CCA chemicals, and you'll see how much of those. Arsenic, 25 pounds into the air, chromium, almost 66 pounds into the air, copper, 14 pounds. And then you see dioxin. Dioxin is in grams. It's the most toxic substance known to man, and it's very toxic at very, very small quantities. So above, when we were talking about pounds, for dioxin, we're talking about grams. And they have how much grams they release into the water of Huffman Creek and then into the wastewater treatment plant. And then hexachlorobenzene on the next page, lead, and then naphthalene. So they have a large number of chemicals they release into the air, into the water, and into the sewer plant. So then let's talk about DEQ air sampling that utilized what's called the Mobile Air Monitoring Lab, or MAML. And they used it in Alexandria and Pineville near the 2 wood treating facilities. And this is part of the data that we're going to give to the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry, documenting what you're being exposed to. So citizens' complaints about DEQ and EPA and others concerning the odors and the potential emissions of dangerous and toxic chemicals. DEQ performed air sampling around the wood treating facilities in both Alexandria and Pineville in October and December of 2013. The Alexandria wood treating facility sample was Stella Jones, the Pineville, Kisatchie. Air samples from Alexandria and Pineville contained detectable levels of naphthalene, phenol, creosote, and phenol, and in concentrations that didn't exceed the Louisiana ambient air standard. So DEQs would say, well, it's no big deal because it didn't exceed our air standard. In addition, a large number of other polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons were detected in the air sample, but they don't have ambient standards, so they don't have anything to compare it to. Now, since the last workshop that we had in December, there's been some new data collected and some evaluation of all 3 of those sampling times. And what has happened is that they have determined that the semi-volatiles samples were collected October of 13, December of 13, and August of 14. We didn't have the August 14 data last time we were here. The report identified the exposure pathways as inhalation for those residents in the areas surrounding the wood treating facility. So when you're at your home and you go, that's inhalation. And if the air has contaminants in it, where do those contaminants go? Into your body. So the pathway of exposure is inhalation. The Stella Jones facility had 15 PAHs in the air sample in October. And you do like a toxic equivalent calculation so that the most toxic ones weigh heavier. So the standard is 0.001. And you'll see in the middle of the page, in that page, the Stella Jones in October was 7.6 times the standard. That's a bunch over the standard. Then they came back in Stella Jones and did August of 14, 7.9 times the standard. And then Kisatchie and Pineville, 11.7 times. So this is what the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry needs to see, because these are the concentrations in the air that are exceeding acceptable levels that you are exposed to and you are breathing in every single day. So the Department of Health and Hospitals, Office of Public Health, concluded from this evaluation of the 3 sets of data that there was no significant increase and lifetime cancer risk, meaning exposure for your lifetime, there was no significant increase. However, the cancer risk was based on a small number of samples collected over a short period of time and may not reflect actual long-term exposure. The department recommended additional sampling be performed over an extended period of time to determine if carcinogens, cancer-causing chemicals of concern, are present in the ambient air in the community for long enough periods to pose increased cancer risk. So Chris, if you would put a big star on that paragraph, thank you. And EPA, Charlotte, you put a star on it. The citizens in Pineville and in Alexandria are looking to these two agencies, the state agency and the federal agency, to do additional sampling before we have the agency for toxic substances come in and do a health evaluation. We don't want them to come in and then say we didn't have enough data. But we did all this study, but we didn't have enough data. We want the data going into the process. So then let's look at dioxins in the blood and the attic dust in your community. Well, they picked 4 wood treating facilities: Alexandria, Stella Jones, Pineville, Kisatchie, and then 1 in Grenada, Mississippi, and 1 in Alabama. And you'll see that on the bottom of page 8. You'll see the attic dust, the concentrations, and then in the last column, you'll see how many times it exceeded EPA residential soil. So your attic dust exceeds EPA's residential soil. Alexandria by 155 times. 155 times over the standard. Pineville 174 times over the standard. Grenada, Mississippi 40 times, and Alabama 40 times. So if you had a choice, where would you live if you only had these 4 choices? It wouldn't be Alexandria, and it wouldn't be Pineville. And if you had a real choice, you would live in any of these 4 locations. So the data in the study found that hazardous material originating from the wood treating facilities traveled off-site, impacting the surrounding residential areas. The elevated levels of dioxin and furan and attic dust show that the residential area surrounding the facility has been exposed to dust that potentially contain unsafe levels of dioxin and furan. It was a 2-mile radius around each one of these facilities. So it wasn't just what we always call a fence line community. It extended out 2-mile radius around each of those facilities that the attic dust was that contaminated. So now let's look at your blood. The blood samples were collected from 11 individuals in Alexandria and 11 in Pineville. And they were current or past residents living within that 2-mile radius of the wood treating facility who had health conditions that could potentially be linked to persistent exposure to dioxin and furan. Health conditions potentially associated with dioxin and furan. So the blood in Alexandria sample was 3.6 times the national average for our TCDD, which is the most toxic of the congeners of dioxin. And you'll see that in the chart at the bottom of the page. Alexandria, 3.6 times national average. Pineville, 7.8 times. Mississippi, 2.6 times. Alabama, 11.3 times. Some of you have heard about Mossville in Calcasieu Parish. The general just told you about the industrial facilities surrounding it. Their blood is 3 times the national average, and yours is 3.6 and 7.8. So the data in the study demonstrated that the population surrounding the wood treating facility has statistically higher concentrations of dioxin in the blood-liquid fraction than the general population in the United States. And then the levels were consistently higher than the national control group. So this is important to show to the Agency for Toxic Substances.